Howdy, my name is Kirsten Kalmbach, and today my partner Matthew Walker and I will be discussing education in other countries around the world. First, please watch this video about the PISA report and what it tells us about education in the United States in comparison with other countries.
Every 3 years, the OECD tests 15-year-olds around the world with the PISA and ranks countries based on the results. And every 3 years, some people use the ranking to say U.S. public education is failing. They say we must privatize, test, incentivize, union bust, cut, and fire our way to success. What they are hoping is that you'll look only at the rankings and not the lessons that can be learned from the highest performing countries. Because when you delve deeper, you will see that these countries have very different priorities from the ones they are pushing in the United States. One myth they perpetuate is that student performance in the U.S. is dropping like a rock. In fact, since the PISA study began, the United States performance has been relatively consistent, slightly above average in reading, about average in science, and below average in math. Is this good enough? Of course not, especially since other countries are improving at a faster rate. But to make real progress, we need to focus on what will help U.S. students improve the most. One thing PISA research makes clear is that poverty's effect on educational equity matters. The United States has a much higher child poverty rate than most developed countries. If you compare apples to apples and divide up U.S. schools based on their poverty rate, U.S. schools with less than 10% poverty lead most top-performing countries with similar rates. The same holds true with poverty rates between 10 and 24%, 25 and 49%, and between 50 and 75%. In each group, the U.S. is near the top. The PISA research also shows that high-performing countries are doing a better job reducing the achievement gap. Another myth is that we already spend the most of any country on education, so that proves that schools don't need more money. Actually, when you remove the high cost of college, the U.S. ranks only slightly above average. But the real problem in the U.S. is the lack of equity in spending. The U.S. ranks near the bottom in providing poor children equal access to quality educational materials. And the U.S. is only one of 4 countries where student-to-teacher ratios are actually higher for disadvantaged students. Since the economic crisis, compared to the OECD average, U.S. education spending is moving in the wrong direction with a 1% cut. Only 3 countries have cut more. The U.S. also lags in early childhood education. Only 51% of 3-year-olds in the U.S. are enrolled in high-quality preschools, compared to much higher rates in other countries. Another myth perpetuated is that our teachers are overpaid and their workday is too short. In fact, looking into the PISA data, it's not hard to see why almost 50% of teachers in the U.S. quit within 5 years. U.S. primary school teachers spend the most hours teaching in the classroom among all PISA countries, and yet rank near the bottom in teacher pay. In high-performing countries, teachers don't work fewer hours. Rather, they use the extra time to collaborate, prepare lessons, grade papers, and talk with parents, all of which help student performance. Another myth is that other countries have better teachers because they only recruit from the top third of college graduates. OECD labels this claim as not supported by evidence. Actually, high-performing countries work to ensure all teachers are well-prepared and supported throughout their careers. Yet another myth is that the problem is obstruction from the teachers' unions. In fact, the highest-performing countries like Japan and Finland have the strongest teachers' unions, and the OECD recommends working with rather than demonizing unions. Maybe, just maybe, the problem is not the teachers, or the unions, or the parents, or the students. Maybe we're not doing the right things. So this year, rather than wringing our hands about the U.S. ranking and doing the wrong things, we need to learn lessons from top-performing countries, investing in early childhood education, targeting resources to the kids who need it the most, giving teachers time to prepare lessons and collaborate, proper implementation of a robust curriculum, using tests to help teachers meet students' needs rather than as punishment, and treating teachers, community groups, and unions as partners in improving education. Only by implementing these proven reforms will we be able to reclaim the promise of a quality public education for all children in the United States.
So like the video says, some things that people have been saying is that maybe our students are performing too low on these PISA exams. And so what we looked for is we looked to see possibly why. And one of the things that the video brought up was how the student-teacher ratios in classrooms are too big. Some say they're too small to be able to get our teachers to work proficiently. Another one is that maybe education should be prioritized. Maybe it should be sent to companies to where, or charter schools. But the problem with charter schools is that they cost money and some people just aren't able to afford them here. But one thing that we looked at is that it's kind of how poverty also affects education with just with the local country, with other countries, explaining like the European, the European continent. For example, when you look at Finland, they're only 5% of their children are living in poverty. But when you compare it to the United States, who has roughly 60 times as large, where the population is 60 times larger than Finland's, and the geographical size is, I don't know how many times larger, should we be comparing our education to someone who has only 5% of their children, whereas we have more than 20% of our children living in poverty?
Another difference in education between the United States and other countries throughout the world is the money spent on education. In the United States, many of the wealthiest, highest spending school districts spend around twice as much money per student as the lowest spending districts. In some states, this ratio of wealthy versus poor district spending is more than 3 to 1. This means that children who live in poverty are less likely to have the same quality education as students in wealthier districts. However, this is not the case around the world. In Ontario, Canada, for example, school districts strive to eliminate or at least minimize the funding inequality that would otherwise exist between poor and wealthy school districts. This reduction or elimination of the funding inequality helps ensure that children who are raised in poverty are getting the same quality education as students their age who were raised in wealthier families.
A good point that the video brought up was how it's important to put children in an earlier education program. We've known just from the classes that we've taken that from ages 2 to 5 or 6, that's the best way for a child to start learning. And when we look at other countries and their percentage rate of having children in a childhood or a primary education program, and you compare it to the United States with less than 80% of our children in a primary childhood program, it's just not beneficial for us moving forward, especially when you compare it to people like Mexico who have 100% of their children, Japan with 93% of their children in a primary education program. That was only just in 2011, and they've been working for the last about 5 years to make sure that 100% of their children are placed in a primary education program. And then we also know that just having education is important in many communities, whether it's in Belgium, Canada, Japan, the Netherlands. It's just important to have children in there because it supports also a stable home life and children's early development at the same time.
Childhood education around the world is considered more important and is held up to higher standards than it is in the United States. Countries around the world realize that improving family and community engagement is very beneficial for a young child in their education. New Zealand has learned that when parental engagement is integrated into social policies for families, it helps support a stable home life, which in turn supports children's early development at the same time. Countries such as Belgium, British Columbia, Japan, Korea, Mexico, the Netherlands, and Norway recognize that facilitating open communication and good relationships with other services, such as social or health services, is important because it increases early detection of learning errors. Similarly, Japan learned that by working with relevant social and development agencies, childhood education can be carried out by society as a whole. Early childhood education centers have learned from these other services how to improve the learning environment of young children and is close to achieving universal pre-primary education, with 93% of 4-year-olds enrolled in childhood education in 2011.
In 2011, the OECD found that the average United States teacher spent about 2,000 statutory working time as a teacher. This ranked second amongst the OECD countries, with Chile only being a little bit higher. When you compare that to countries like Japan, who, although they have a very high statutory working time, Japan, for this instance, was 1,883 hours on average in 2011. But their actual time in the classroom was about 886 hours. And the reason why this was such a big gap was because although the teacher was teaching the classroom, but they were also getting involved in the community, something that the United States doesn't permit. A lot of time doesn't kind of really happen unless the teacher goes over and above. When you look at Japan, a lot of these teachers are club organizers or they're club administration facilitators, and so they're able to make the connections with their students or with other students who possibly might be in their classroom or who have already left the classroom or who might not even be in their classroom with them, and help them push them to be better students. And then also, as the video showed, teachers in the United States are paid lower than their OECD professionals in other countries. So this really just kind of dwells on the fact that are teachers really overpaid and underworked, or are we really overworked and underpaid? So in 2012, OECD, or the PISA test, tested more than 510,000 students in 65 countries on economics of math, reading, and science, with the main focus basically being on math. But they found that the strongest math proficiencies students were in the Asian countries, in like China, with Shanghai, Hong Kong, and and Macau. Chinese Taipei, Korea, and Japan were also very highly ranked from the 2012 PISA test results. And when you look at these Asian countries, the reason why they have such effective teaching is because they place great emphasis on selecting and the training, how they select the teachers and how they train the teachers. And one way they train the teachers, they encourage them to work together and prioritize investments in teacher qualities, and instead of the government more worried about the classroom size or giving them a curriculum that they have to follow, they give the teachers the autonomy in the classroom. And another reason why a lot of these children do better is because when you look at the home factor, a lot of their parents have high expectations for these students to perform better, which is also something that happens in the United States. But it's just one thing that the OECD found through the latest survey on global education. So when we look in the United States, one thing that the video brought up was how our teachers compared to other countries, ours come from like a lower third compared to where some of the other countries have teachers come from the top third. But one thing that we found is that mainly when people are looking at this, they're looking at SAT and ACT scores, and we all know that's not the best way to really assess the best teachers. So that's why we're finding about new teachers, and they're disproportionately represented in the group just because of their SAT and ACT scores.
Another point the video touched on was the assumption that other countries have better teachers because they recruit from only the top third of college graduates. However, this at best is an incomplete picture because teachers are disproportionately represented in this group. Another question people tend to ask when talking about education in other countries is, why do other countries teach better? This is because that in countries such as Finland, an important effort has been made in the training of teachers. In 1979, Finland decided to move preparation for teachers out of smaller teacher colleges and into bigger universities, where the training became much more rigorous. By professionalizing teacher training and raising its value in society, the Finns have made teaching the country's most popular occupation for the young people. These teaching programs recruit from the top quarter of the graduating high school class, demonstrating that such training has prestige, which is lacking in the United States. Teacher preparation programs in the United States, according to a recent report by the National Council on Teacher Quality, are an industry of mediocrity. This National Council rated only 10% of more than 1,200 programs as high quality, as most do not have any academic standards for entry. This is just one example of why people assume that other countries teach better than the United States.
So, as the video provided, some people believe that there shouldn't be a teachers union, but then if there's not a teachers union, who's going to be the ones who are going to be fighting for the teachers and the U.S. government? Because we all know that teachers are important, and that sometimes if they aren't able to tell their voice, how are they going to be able to describe it? And so one thing that we found is that in Finland actually has a very strong teachers union, and it contributes to building a top-notch teaching profession because it serves as a professional organization that trains and develops these teachers. And another thing that they've done is they've evolved just beyond the traditional adversarial focus on bread and butter issues, and started to build trusting but tough-minded partnerships with the management of the government and of these schools. So one thing that made it interesting is that instead of we shouldn't take away the teachers unions. We should almost refocus it.
Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and I hope that you learned more information about education in other countries and how it compares to the education in the United States. Thanks, and Gig'em.